Welcome, and thank you for joining us for tonight's Evergreen Conversation. I'm Colleen Repko. I'm a class of '02 alum and Director of Alumni Engagement here at Loyola. And I am very excited to be joined by Kevin Atticks, a class of '97, founder and CEO of Grow Fortify, the Director of the Apprentice House Press, faculty member, and the advisor of the Greyhound and Evergreen Annual at Loyola, as he recommends wine for Thanksgiving dinner. And Kevin, I think we're all really looking forward to tonight's conversation and learning more about the wines you recommend, especially as some of us might be cooking Thanksgiving dinner for the first time this year and doing things a little bit differently. So we're excited to welcome you, and I'll let you take it from here.
Well, thank you, Colleen, and thanks to everybody in the alumni office for the opportunity and the invitation. So I'd love to keep this casual, and I see some names of folks that I miss seeing and talking to over the years. So please jump in and ask questions or make accusations, whatever comes to you. I'd love to have a conversation tonight. What's interesting about the situation we're in is that 2020 is wild, and we all know that it's wild. And then here we come to what is for many families the biggest gathering of the year, the biggest meal of the year, and it's going to look different. It's going to be very different than ever before. And so, there are a lot of folks who, as Colleen mentioned, are going to be on their own and cooking for the first time, or huddling together with, their bubble or their pod or their apartment complex or their condo, or, just their mom who lives with them and not the extended family. And so, it's going to be interesting. It's going to make for a very interesting meal. So I took that into context and I'm going to try to shift the perspective of what would have been, a tasting for preparing for a meal with, a dozen people or more. A lot of big families out there. I think I look back in my history of family gatherings, our biggest was 18 people. So not a huge family. But I was the first one in the history of our family Thanksgivings to introduce wine. And I remember the first time I did that, there was a lot of skepticism and why would we do this? And beer's just fine. And it was after, learning a little bit about wine at Loyola when I was there, and coming home from grad school shortly thereafter and bringing some wine in and starting to, describe to people the basics of why wine for Thanksgiving. And this right here is illustrative of why wine. So of course, I work in the beer industry too, so I'm all pro beer, and that's great. But there's something about wine pairing with food, and different wines and the attributes of those different wines with the different foods. In our household, when Andrea is prepping for a dinner, I will try to find wines that pair with whatever that is. When I'm prepping dinner, I pick the wines first, and then I figure out what I'm going to eat with it, because that's how strong that correlation and that connection is, wine to wine. So a couple of goals for tonight, at least my goals, and you can shapeshift this however you want. But my goals are to illustrate why wine and why wine would pair with what you're having for Thanksgiving. The fact that Thanksgiving, if you're into wine and food pairing, Thanksgiving is the ultimate test for a couple of reasons. Because number one, you've got, on average, I saw a survey, 8 different distinct dishes on average, right? And many families have traditions that go way beyond 8 different dishes. So there may be turkey or ham or something in the middle, or pasta or a filet or whatever it is. But there are all these side dishes. And for me, growing up, that was the fun of Thanksgiving. Yes, there was the bird, whatever bird it was, but there are all those cool things, stuffing and the beans and had rather old-fashioned, green beans with casserole with, crispy onions on top, and probably made with mushroom soup mix, or I don't know what the trend is nowadays, but that's not it. That's retro Thanksgiving. So all the different foods is the one thing. And then the other thing is all the different people. The idea that you've got so many people with so many different palates, the way we've done Thanksgiving is we open up a whole bunch of wines and ask what people would like to try, and talk a little about if folks are tolerant of chatting about wine. A lot of people just want to drink and be done with it, but try to make those connections and figure out why this is a good wine for a certain meal. So any questions before we dive in? And we've got the chat function open. Feel free to post things in there. So what I decided to do for this was to pick 6 different wines. And because Thanksgiving is an American, kind of the quintessential American holiday, pick American-made wines. And as you probably know, wines are made everywhere, all over the country, every region of the country. And that's the exciting part. What's even more fun is that wherever you are, wherever you're joining from tonight, there is a local wine region. So, my plea to you is to, if you're thinking about wine, pick wines from anywhere you'd like, pick interesting wines, but try to pick something local. I've got one wine tonight that I'm trying that's local to me, that if you're not in Maryland, you're probably not going to be able to find it. But I'm picking these wines based on the style and their applicability to tasting, more broadly and pairing more broadly with Thanksgiving. So with that premise, let's jump first and foremost. So we got a first question in there, and I'm actually going to open this bottle. So this is not just a hypothetical tasting. I guess for you it is, and I'm sorry for that. But I'm actually going to open these and try them and just remind myself about these wines, because these are all wines that I love personally, but I haven't had them in a while. So I saw them on the shelf and they fit the theme, and I figured we would open them up. So while this is getting going, Catherine said, always curious, white versus red. Traditionally, poultry suggests white. Cooler temps draw me to reds. Thoughts? So, the old adage is, white with fish and with poultry, and then, or with white meat in general. You can put pork in there too, and then reds with basically everything else. So red meats, red pasta sauce. And, over time that's changed. My advice is drink what you think pairs well with whatever you're eating at the time. So I boil it down. So we got dogs, right? Working from home, tasting from home. So try to just figure out, what is it that you're eating? Are you eating something that's rich in fat? If so, you're going to want something that is a wine that has more acid to cut through that fat. And that's what makes something a better pairing, is when you can meld the wine and those flavors together. There are a lot of people that, and I'll do it on occasion too, drink wine without food, and that's fine. There are certain wines that you don't want to drink without food because they're built for food. They are made with food in mind. And so you have to, go back a little bit maybe and figure out why these wines are the way they are. And there's Michelle Miller. Yes, the dog is very interested now, right? And beautiful dog, by the way. So here's the thing with bubbly, because who doesn't like bubbles, right? We're a nation that likes bubbles. We like carbonated things. Sparkling water is the #1 thing. Don't get me started on hard seltzers and those kind of things. Stick to the natural stuff. So what's great about sparkling wine is that those bubbles come with, and air to them, quite literally. So they almost pop in your mouth, and they're effervescent, and they make light of cheese and nuts and things like that, depending upon what it is you're trying. Olives, think of kind of the little appetizer, crudité type stuff. Bubbles work really, really well with that. They also pair with some difficult to pair foods. Sometimes you can do a light vinaigrette, and the bubbles are able to trump that and cut through that. So other great thing about sparkling wine is it's produced throughout the world. So, everyone knows Champagne. Champagne is only from the Champagne region. There's sparkling wine everywhere else in the world. Some have names for it. Some just call it sparkling wine. This one is made in New Mexico, and these are all American wines, and this is one that you can find in just about every state. Gruyere is the name of it, and it's only $15. It's a phenomenal sparkling wine, and it's Blanc de Noir, which means it's a white made from red grapes. And that just means that the grapes are pressed and then the skins are removed really quickly so that no color drips in there. But it's really great with a variety of food. And I'm going to take a quick taste. So that's going to be great with, as I mentioned, like fatty and oily foods. It's going to be really good with that. And that would actually pair with pasta with white sauce, cream sauce, and even chicken and that type of stuff. My favorite pairing ever, all pairing, champagne or sparkling wine with Rofo chicken. Favorite pairing ever. Fine restaurants are nice, but that's the favorite pairing, and it's because you've got the fat, the grease, the oil, the salt, and this really effervescent thing. So please, run, don't walk to Rofo and your nearest wine shop and get some sparkling wine, and report back. And I'm glad that Rofo is making it north, right? So Royal Farms, for those of you who are part of the unknown crowd, but fried chicken of any kind. So go to KFC or Popeyes and get some sparkling wine, and please report back. But I think you'll find that it's quite an amazing pairing. So next up, Riesling. So here's the thing with Riesling. It has a reputation of being a sweet wine and being a non-serious wine. And the problem with that is that it's a beautiful, beautiful wine. And it's my favorite food wine because it is extremely pretty. And I should be pouring it up here, but it's extremely pretty on the nose. So when you smell it, there's flowers and apples, pears. There's this thing which happens with Riesling sometimes where it gets what the wine writers will call a petrol smell, which is meant to be kind of a gassy gasoline smell. It's a positive thing. Don't chuck it because it smells like diesel. It actually adds to the flavor and aroma of the wine. And what's really cool about Riesling is you can get Riesling that's totally dry meaning absence of sugar, all the way up to being very, very, very sweet. And the sweet wines are beautiful wines that you can have with cheese and kind of an after dinner type late harvest style, rich, almost cloyingly sweet, viscous, wine. But when you're looking to pair with food, a drier or an off-dry Riesling is the way to go. And so, this to me is your stuffing, green beans, mashed potato wine. Like it works with all of those and all the different elements that go with it. And I picked this one from Herman Weimer because it's from the Finger Lakes. And the Finger Lakes has become the top American wine producing region for this grape. Riesling grows throughout the world and grows really well. And I'm having to swallow a couple times because there's a lot of acid, which is great for food. And it also has a very, very long finish. So some wine writers will talk about long finish and real depth and how it hangs on there. For me, I've always judged it. How many times do you have to swallow? How many times does it make you swallow? You're salivating, it's making you swallow after you swallow it. And the longer, the more times, I always think the better the wine, the more interesting the wine, because it's still talking to you, right? It's still going. So Finger Lakes, you can get Finger Lakes wines in most parts of the country. So look for Riesling from the Finger Lakes. You can also find it from Washington State, Oregon, California. We've got 1 or 2 producers of it in Maryland. It tends to like a little cooler weather than what we have here. So Pennsylvania, you can find it, New Jersey, New York, and even further north than that. Michigan, some phenomenal Riesling coming out of Michigan, phenomenal wine in general. So really something that I recommend and encourage folks to try. And I'm putting some pronunciations in here into the wines that I've heard mispronounced. So I can't tell you how many times I hear Riesling. Oh, I'll have a Riesling. And nothing drives a wine server or sommelier nuts faster than mispronouncing common wine names. So Riesling is the name of it. And I know they spell it wrong and they put the I before the E. I got it, but you know, that's how we roll in the wine world. So next up is Viognier, which is another one. I hear Viognier a lot. It's Viognier. And what's different about this is that you think of white wines very often being clean and crisp and, you know, very acidic. And this one, just due to the genetics of that grape, when this wine gets in your mouth, it almost comes across as oily, which again, sounds strange. I talked about petroleum and gas a minute ago as a good thing, but I mean it here as well as a good thing. What's really interesting is that you get flower blossoms and, you know, I usually get some white or light fruit, green fruit, pears, sometimes green plums. So this is all flowers. This one is all like flower blossoms, jasmine, like orange blossom, that kind of thing. And then you can already kind of smell it, that there's going to be this, what the chefs call umami, right? This mouthfeel that's going to be different. And you can smell it in the aroma. So give it a try. So on the scale of wines, I would say this one kind of falls in with the body of a Chardonnay, but to me, even more so than a Chardonnay, just because it's rich. That oiliness is what gives it the ability to pair not only with kind of the appetizers and side dishes, which I would generally pair with white wines. Not that you're, you know, having a bite of mashed potatoes and having a sip of white wine, but just in terms of where these wines fit on the table. But it will go with meat. It will go with pasta. It will go with, you know, things off the grill, fish, pork, that kind of thing. So it's a really, really versatile white wine, and it's widely grown as well. So widely grown and commonly mispronounced. This one's from Washington State, Columbia Valley. They're not particularly known for Viognier, but they make some really nice Viognier out of Columbia Valley. And I'm also starting to see some other Rhone wines, you know, wines and grapes that originated in the Rhone Valley, and Viognier is one of those and is most commonly found kind of in the French Rhone area. Michelle, thank you for the comments. You know, Viognier is one of those wines where if it's one that I like, I love it. And if it's one that I don't like, just the composition of it, still extremely well-made wine, but for some reason it's maybe too broad on the palate or has too much of that oily flavor, I can sometimes run from it. But more and more are getting into that, you know, middle sphere where they're trying to make a wine that is just good all around as a food wine. And that's really where kind of Viognier, I think, is headed. So those are the whites. So you'll notice I didn't talk about Chardonnay. One of the reasons is that Chardonnay has a tendency to be, in America at least, over oaked. Now, happily, that is changing, and it's not as oaky as they used to be. So 10 years ago, if you picked a California Chardonnay off the shelf, it would have the aromas or mouthfeel of licking a 2x4. Like, it was extremely oak aged and fermented in oak. And maybe they added, oak extract or oak staves in there to make it even oakier. Happily, as of late, you can find more commonly very, very crisp Chardonnays. But Chardonnay is one of those grapes, at least to me, that it is what you do to it. And so my favorites tend to be, mildly oaky Chardonnays, where you're getting, the structure and the tannins and the flavor of the oak, but still the crispness of the fruit. But the reason it's not here is because I'm not sure it's the best pairing wine. It's a great drinking on your own wine when we're talking about Thanksgiving and the cacophony of flavors. And again, the asterisk, the caveat with all of these is drink what you like. So if you like Chardonnay, my gosh, drink Chardonnay. But there's so many interesting wines that are beautiful, that lend themselves to something on that Thanksgiving table, whether it's Albarino or Gruner Veltliner, or, there are dozens of grape varieties. If you're on the East Coast, you'll find Vidal Blanc, which is really, really can be a stunning grape. Chenin Blanc is another one. So there's really interesting wines that are not oaky. And I think when you're dealing with that cacophony of flavors, the cornucopia, as they say, it's better just to have kind of that precise fruit and acid and body, and then let the food do what it's supposed to do on Thanksgiving, because generally people don't come to Thanksgiving for the wine. I like to think maybe in my household they do, but generally it's for the food. So Sauvignon Blanc is another great one with Thanksgiving. So jumping forward, the first red is a really cool concept, and that is Nouveau. And what Nouveau is, it is wine that was produced quite literally a month ago. It was harvested off the vines, put in the tanks, pressed or not pressed, crushed or not crushed. So there's different winemaking, processes that Nouveau can go through. But it's meant to be like the very first fermentation, the first harvest, the first crush of the year. And it's really big. It originated in Beaujolais, and you can find hundreds, probably not hundreds, but dozens and dozens of Beaujolais Nouveau available right now in a fine wine shop. And they're this, pretty color, and they're bright, and you're seeing a lot of Beaujolais rosés as well. And so you can find them from around the world, but our local producers are having a great time doing this as well, because it's tradition. It's just a very, very interesting thing for a winery to do. Not every winery does it, but if they have a little extra of something, they may put it through a Nouveau process and have it come out bright and fresh and ASAP, and just in time for Thanksgiving. So this one is, I'll hold it up. This one is from Maryland, and it's from Old Westminster Winery, which is one of our newer wineries, but they've really been doing cool stuff. And so this is Chambourcin, whole cluster fermented. Chambourcin is another East Coast grape, but as I pour that, you should see that this is a really, really bright color. It's hard to see in this light, but when you take a look down through the glass, and I always like, when I'm tasting, I always like to have something white. So I've got a white countertop here, but if you have a white piece of paper or a napkin or something, just so you can hold it up and actually see through the color, it is a really, really vibrant color. And what that tells me is it hasn't seen oak. It hasn't gone through an aging process, because aging involves air and oxygen oxidizes the wine. So it turns those bright colors onward to orange. Hopefully not for a while, but that's the direction that red wines are heading. And what I love about Nouveau is there's no pretension, and it's typically cheap, and it's in your face fruit. And this one smells like strawberry banana smoothie. So it's like, just drink me now. Like there's no pretense to it. And it's the kind of thing that you can pour and it will pair really well with turkey or game. And you know, when I say game, there are a lot of people that are having, you know, turkey plus. They're having duck or pheasant or you know, grouse, or you know, whatever it is that you can find from your local market. It can also go well with lamb. I mean, there's a lot of different ways that you can pair Nouveau. But the whole point of Nouveau is just to enjoy it and to kind of relish in the fact that this is the first wine from this harvest, and it's the only red wine you're going to get from the harvest for at least a year. You know, most red wines will be processed and turned into, not turned into, but get into wine, the form of wine after fermentation, and put into a barrel to age for 10 months, 20 months, sometimes longer than that. And so wines from 2020, you may not actually see red wines from 2020 for a year and a half. White wines will come out in the spring. Yeah. So like totally no pretense, no tannins, just bright fruit. And tannins, for anyone who doesn't know what tannins are, tannins come from the skins of a grape, and it's a great exercise in winemaking to buy some grapes, buy some red grapes and some green grapes, and squeeze the pulp. You know, cut the grape open or just squeeze it, it'll pop. Squeeze the pulp out, and you'll notice right away that the pulp in both the red and the black and the white grape, it's all clear. The pulp is all clear to a greenish hue. So the color and the mouthfeel, the kind of this leathery, sometimes biting feel that you get on the sides of your mouth, are coming from tannins, which come from the grapes and sometimes the seeds, the skins of the grapes or the seeds, or sometimes the stems, if those have not been removed, the woody stems. So that's where you're getting these prominent tannins. And then when you age a red wine, the oak that the barrel is made from also has tannins. And so the dog wants to go out. Hey, Charlie, we're not going to go out now. Come here. I mean, if it gets urgent, I'll let the dog out. So, you know, that's the great thing about wine is you can look at the age of a wine, and if you like really, really heavy tannic wines, get a younger wine. If you like a wine that's mellowed out over the years, the tannins do begin to smooth out, and the longer it's in oak, there's, you know, this more extraction of flavor from the oak, less tannin, and you can get a smoother wine. The grape variety also has a lot to do with the body and the tannin, as we'll talk about in just a moment. But Nouveau is just a cool thing to have. So I highly encourage people to give that a try. And I'd love to see in chat if anyone's had a Nouveau before, because it's the kind of wine that comes and goes. If you're not looking for it in November, you've lost it. It goes away. I'm going to call for backup on the dogs. We have a fox that's been coming right up to the door and taunting the dogs. So, you know, I highly encourage the dogs to go play with the local wildlife as we're talking about local wine here. So next up, Pinot. So Pinot Noir is a grape that really got famous and has originated from Burgundy in France. And it was made famous by a couple of movies, Sideways being one, more modern famous. You know, wine folks knew about Pinot for many years and have watched it, have collected it, have aged it. But Pinot has been growing really, really well in Oregon and Sonoma in California. And so to see that happen and to see the popularity of those wines and the flavors that they're able to bring to this grape, which is a little bit persnickety, it doesn't grow everywhere. Chardonnay grows just about everywhere until you get to the northern states in the US. But Chardonnay, you can put it anywhere in Maryland, anywhere in New York, most places in Michigan, does just fine. Where Pinot, you can't do that. And Pinot and Chardonnay are from the same region. in France. Pinot has this, a good Pinot has this texture, and that's how people really describe it. You can have red wines, you can have Cabs, Cab Franc, Merlot, etc. Pinot, there's just this feeling. It's a lighter bodied wine, but it's really, 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 really textured and can be smooth. And because of that, it's a really great pairing wine. So really, really good to pair with lighter meat, braised meat. So probably not things off the grill, but pork definitely. You know, it can have earthy components and kind of leafy. Sometimes writers will call it forest floor, sometimes barnyard, but it just has this earthy component to it, which very different from the Beaujolais, which is all fruit. Right, all fruit, whereas the Pinot has much more depth. And I will say that when it comes to spending money on wine, I would save your money for a good Pinot. And this is a producer that I've been following. They make incredible Pinots in Sonoma, and now they're doing it in Oregon as well. So let's give this a try. Fela is the name of it. And you can find this now in most stores. It used to be, or most fine wine shops, it used to really be mailing list only or winery only. So this is, we didn't really talk about vintages, but this is a 2018. So it's 2 years old, and you may not be able to see it, but the color is lighter and more mellow than that, than the Nouveau, which is just so bright and has bluish hues. This one has a little more orange, and yeah, it's gorgeous. So again, plum and strawberry, and I mean, you do get some earthiness, but this really has beautiful, like red fruit. And if anybody's interested in learning to describe wine, invest in a wine aroma wheel, which is a really nifty tool to be able to take a first sniff and say, okay, I smell red fruit, and then there's a red fruit section, and then you can go through and, like, I smell definitely red plum and some pomegranate and some other things in here, which is great. So fruit on the front, earth on the back. Thank you, Michelle. But yeah, I mean, that's how it is, because generally we can only taste 4 things, arguably 5, right? Sweet, sour, bitter, salt, and then umami, which is this oily flavor as well that you get from tomatoes and mushrooms and soy sauce. Everything else is aroma. So there's what you smell out of the glass, and then there's what you smell after you take it in your mouth, and it's going back and passing through your, the backside of your nasal passages, and you'll end up smelling a lot in the mouth too. And that's one of the reasons why you see wine, I'll call them cork dorks, but people who are really into wine, they take it in their mouth and they slurp. And it's incredibly pretentious to do, and I have to catch myself from doing it audibly when I'm in public, but it typically happens, and I'll do one now just for kicks. The reason you do that is you're aerating the wine in your mouth. You're doing in your mouth exactly what you're doing when you're swirling the wine, which is get those aromas active and get it going, and you end up smelling and tasting so much. So this one has extremely smooth but obvious tannins, mouth-filling tannins, and a really, really long finish. And as I've said, I really encourage you, if you're going to spend money on wine, you should spend money on Pinot. You can spend great money on any wine. You know, you can buy very expensive Chardonnays, very expensive Cabernets, but you are rewarded by spending a little bit more on Pinot. There was a question here. What do you think about sulfite-free and natural wines? So I love all wines as long as they're well-made wines, and just about every wine has sulfites in them due to the grape growing process, where sulfites are used on the grapes. Now the rain washes the sulfite off, and there's not a whole lot that comes into the wine. There can also be sulfites added to wine to preserve it, to keep it from spoiling, to keep the grape scabies and boogies and everything else out through that process, because it is a natural process. Intentionally sulfite-free wines and natural wines. I've had some beautiful sulfite-free and natural wines. I've had about as many that have what one would consider a typical winemaking flaw, where because a certain additive or certain condition wasn't granted to that wine at the right moment, volatile acidity has grown. And so you start smelling super, super high acid in the wine, or the color turns prematurely. And so, when I talk to them, we've got winemakers in Maryland that make natural wines. I like to have that conversation. Why are you doing it? If you're doing it because you want to be able to claim you're natural, and, if the goal is natural and sulfite free, and the goal is not a wine that in 6 months will be as good as the wine that you bottled, then that's great. But from a consumer standpoint, and I've talked with consumers who are both ways, who their guiding principle is, I want it to be natural, and so I'm willing for it not to taste the way that I expect a wine to taste, or I'm willing for it to be potentially re-fermenting in the bottle, which, if it's not preserved, the yeast could continue going, and that wine could be re-fermenting. And I've had a bunch of those. Sometimes it's really pleasant. You buy a bottle of wine, you don't think it's sparkling, and you get bubbles. Who doesn't love bubbles? But if you buy a Cabernet and it's a little bubbly and it smells too acidic, then, for me, I would question that. So, but I've had really great sulfite-free and natural wines. There's a whole conversation about sulfites and headaches that drive winemakers crazy, because they will not use any sulfites in the vineyard and not use any sulfites in the winemaking. And people say that their wine gives them headaches because of the sulfites. And so, there's all kinds of research that goes both ways on that. A question about Brett. So Brett is Brettanomyces, which is essentially a bacteria that gets into barrels. And once it's in barrels in a winery, it's very hard to get it out of the winery. And the reason it's a problem is because Brettanomyces interacts with the wine and creates a funky smell. And some people love that funky smell. There are a lot of French wines, particularly Pinots, that have a little bit of Brett. So you'll hear people talk about it. Oh, this has a little bit of Brett, and it's Brettanomyces, which make it funky. I've heard people call it horsey. There's kind of in extreme levels, yes, Michelle, it can get to be kind of a Band-Aid smell, but at low levels, it's kind of this. Wine people get crazy, but kind of, a horsey wet saddle, kind of a barnyard floor, barn, shoveling out of a barn type of smell, which in low doses can be really interesting. And in high doses, just like other things that we don't necessarily want to have in our wines, they can get outrageous and can ruin the wine. But I've had a number of wineries that, go sniffing around because somewhere in their winery there is a Brettanomyces infection. And they bring people in who are very sensitive to that smell to go sniff every barrel. And then they mark those barrels, and those barrels get the heck out. Because once you have it, it's very hard until you remove all of the wood from the winery. It's very hard to get rid of that condition. Comment there, my favorite wine movie was Bottle Shock. I don't remember what the problem was with their brown wine. Anyone know what the problem was, what the issue was? So one thing I wanted to show you, and I mistakenly avoided it. Pinot is a great wine to use to talk about glassware. This is your standard Bordeaux glass, made for Bordeaux wines. Bordeaux wines are Sauvignon Blanc on the white side and Cabernet or Merlot based blends, Cab, Merlot, Petit Verdot, Malbec, and Carmenere are the 5 grapes that can go into Bordeaux. This is the type of wine glass that was produced to best accentuate the characteristics of that wine. Pinot, totally different wine. And so Riedel, one of the top wine glass producers, created a different wine for Pinot. And so you'll notice with this, it's got this larger, wider bowl at the bottom and then this lip at the top. And the idea is the bowl allows for the aromatics to come out a lot better than this bowl, which is a narrower bowl. And then up top here, this lip sends the wine to your mid palate, which has better receptors to take up the wine that is Pinot. So it's a really cool experiment if you've got the interest and a tolerant partner or two to get a Pinot, put it in 2 different glasses, smell it, taste it, and you will find a radically different, same basic characteristics, but a radically different experience from this wine glass. It's softer. The tannins are less pronounced. And a lot of it just has to do with where the wine hits your mouth and how you go from there. So, and I'm glad I looked over because I got these wine glasses out here for this purpose. And just while we're talking about it, again, Bordeaux glass. This is a standard Chardonnay glass, which to me looks like a standard Italian restaurant wine glass, right? The reason that the Chardonnay glass is wider is to coax the aromas out beyond just the oak, generally, and to have a much wider bowl. The folks in Champagne have begun to argue that while this is really cool for looking at bubbles, this is the better glass to drink sparkling wine out of for the same reason. You get more of the aroma and all those things. You can't see the bubbles quite as well. So I still like this. So with that, because I wasn't able to answer Mary's question, let's go to the last wine, which is one of my all-time favorite producers. And this is Ridge Vineyard. So all of their labels have this kind of classic old school typography and grid design. And each one of their wines, they make a few wines that are single varietal, meaning if they say it's Zinfandel, it's Zinfandel. If they say it's Cabernet, it's Cabernet. But this one has, I don't know if you can see that a little bit. So you'll see it has a blend, and the blend of the grapes, and they're very clear about it, it's 70% Zinfandel and 14% Petit Syrah, 12% Carignan, and 4% Mataro. And what I love about this wine is it's clearly a Zin. I'll talk about Zin in a minute, but it's so much more fun because you've got lots of other things in there. And for that, I'm going to use a Rhone style red glass because at least the Zin and the Petit Syrah and in some parts the Carignan are Rhone Valley wines. And so they like a bigger bowl, much like the Pinot does, but without the little lip to throw the wine further back in. So Zinfandel is like the ultimate American grape. So it's a grape that was planted. People didn't quite know what it was. We thought we have found Zinfandel growing elsewhere. and I think Croatia, uh, like the Dalmatian region of Croatia is where it's originating. But it's just this big, bold grape that really didn't have a following in California. There were some old, 60s, 70s Zinfandels, but then I forget the story, but it was like late 70s, early 80s. Uh, Somebody screwed up, made it pink by accident. It had a little bit of sugar in it. They sold it. White Zinfandel took off. So I don't know the age of the folks on this call, but our parents and our parents' parents, but mostly our parents, they'd be 70, 80 years old right now, made Zinfandel famous because of white Zin. When I had my first red Zin when I was in California, it blew me away because it's big and it's bold, but it's at the same time soft and rich, and raspberry and blackberries on the nose, and really, really, really beautiful, cool wine. So this is that transition wine, and you can see, by the time I have garlic in my photo, I was running out of props. So it goes really well with meat. So this is your game, your red meat. It can go very well with anything off the grill. It might be a little overpowering for chicken, if you're braising or doing something that's not a little heavier and a little more direct. Zin may be a little too much for it, but it's a beautiful wine. And when you've got a blend, it's everything that the one grape brings plus 3 or 4 more dimensions, which make it even more interesting. Zinfandel to me is raspberry and blackberry puree and like red plums, and it's always gorgeous. I always love it. And unlike Pinot, you can get a really nice one for $15, $16, $17. If you're willing to spend $30, you're in the big leagues for Zin. You can spend a lot more than that. There are some Zin forward blends that have fancy names, Prisoner and otherwise, that over time have been $40, $50, $60, $80. You don't need to spend that. You can get an amazing Zinfandel from Ridge or another producer like Ridge. Segisio is another one. Some of the other names are escaping me, but they're great. Whereas with Pinot, you got to start around there to get a really good one and go up. So, excuse me. So I'll start with Mary's comment, which is funny. A lot of people had no idea that Zin was red, which I get. You wouldn't, because white Zin was a thing. Love that wine. Alumni office, thank you for letting me get some wines and try these. So a great compromise between Pinot Grigio and a Chardonnay. I'm glad you asked. Pinot Blanc is one. So Pinot Blanc is not an incredibly popular variety. It's not Pinot Gris. It's Pinot Blanc. It's its own grape variety. And for me, it rides right in between PG and Chardonnay, because it's got some acidity, but it's got this amazing mouthfeel. And one of the best white wines I ever had was a Pinot Blanc, and I was tasting it with a friend and colleague and Loyola professor and wine radio show host, Al Spoler, from Baltimore. He does a great radio show that you can stream online, which reviews 4 or 5 wines a week. It's called Cellar Notes. He and Hugh Sisson, who's a beer producer, he owns Heavy Seas, so it's a great pair. But we were sitting there tasting it, and Al is just swirling it, and he takes a sip, and he throws his head back and he says, "It's like a ballerina dancing in this glass." And that's Pinot Blanc. A great Pinot Blanc is just phenomenal. And that's kind of that fine line between being a little more full-bodied, but still having this lightness to it. Thanks for the tip, Michelle. Bella is a very good producer. And great, Bill. Thank you for that. So, so oxidation is probably what it is. And that happens with all wines over time. If they're in a cork, if they're in a traditional cork sealed bottle, the cork is porous and air gets in, and that's what helps to age the wine. But in that aging process, it can also turn the wine a different color. So red wines become more brown and orange, and white wines can become that kind of darker yellow and on to brown at some point. So some other recommendations, and then we'll just open it up for any conversation, discussion that anyone might have. It looks like I just got the high sign. We've got 9 minutes left. Didn't mean to take all that time. Some other recommendations, Sauvignon Blanc, I mentioned it. There's two types of Sauvignon Blanc. There's the kind that they make in France and in most places in California and kind of the, most of the old world plus the US, which it's a really nice, bright, crisp, a little fig leafy on the aroma, maybe a little hint of grassiness. And then there's the New Zealand Sauvignon Blanc style, which is freshly mowed grass, wrapped in fig tree, cat pee on a gooseberry bush, as one of my favorite quotes from Oz Clarke, a very famous wine writer. And it literally smells like cat pee. And if you know what gooseberries are, that's the aroma. It's like a cat, going to town on a gooseberry bush, and that's what it can smell like. That's not the style that we want for Thanksgiving. We want the old world or the California style. Pinot Blanc, I mentioned. Gewürztraminer is an amazing Germanic grape that's aromatic. And if you know what lychee fruit tastes like, it has that bordering on really ripe peaches aroma. And it can be dry, off dry. Typically a slightly off dry is where I like to land. Extremely versatile. Barbera, yes, and it's fun to say. Barbera is a northern Italian grape variety grown in the Piedmont region, but does really well in California and Maryland. It's one of our top grapes. Had some great Pennsylvania Barbera, some great Virginia Barbera as well. And it's a nice kind of round, can be plush wine. Very different from Chianti. You may know Chianti from the Chianti region. Red Chianti tends to be more acidic, and that really needs, it needs oil and acid to cut through. So I think of Chianti and pasta, or Chianti and chicken Parmesan, whatever, eggplant Parmesan. Syrah is another great one, which borders a little more on the earthy side. But it has nice spice to it, and you can get great Syrah from the Rhone region and California and many other places as well. South Africa is making some nice Syrah as well. So, and then red blends. That's kind of my secret weapon. When I don't know what to pair with something, I get a blend like this Ridge Zin, which, it's mostly one thing, but there's lots of other things in it. And that tends to find different things to match with so that you're not very singular in your wine pairing. So with that, any questions? How do you save wines for later? As I'm faced with 6 wines, I'm going to save them. So a couple things you can do. One is a kind of a vacuum seal where you're pretending to pull air out of the bottle. That's very difficult to do when you're not putting anything else in there. There are some bottles which are completely weightless, which is a very strange thing to buy, but there are bottles of argon and other gas that you can spray into the top of the bottle, and that pushes the oxygen out. So it's any gas that's heavier than oxygen will push the oxygen out and create a safety layer over that wine. And you can cork the wine back up and it will be good for a while. putting it in the fridge will also delay premature aging of the wine. And I will put reds in the fridge as well. I actually like my reds a little chilled. So I've had people be concerned about my judgment as I pull red wines out of the refrigerator. I'm not leaving them in there for a day. I'm putting them in there for 20 minutes before I serve it, just to get it down to what wine folks will call cellar temperature, so 50, 60. You don't want it to be very cold. Whereas the sparkling wines, the colder you can make those, the better, because that when you put it in your glass, it'll preserve those bubbles for as long as possible. Good question here. What red would you pair with white fish? So a very light red. So you want a red that has fewer tannins. There's a northern Italian variety called Dolcetto, which I've had frequently with fish, and it works really, really well. You can also talk with a winery or your wine merchant to find a red that has not been oak aged. And there are a lot of German and Austrian reds that I have found that are not oak aged, and they actually go very well with fish. So it's not so much the grape that you're worried about. It's the fact that the fish tends to be lighter. And if you're grilling your fish and you're getting a little bit of smoke and char on it, or you're seasoning it pretty heavily, then anything, you can probably do anything, but you want to have a lighter red with that. Scott, a hidden gem wine that I would recommend. There are lots of hidden gems. I hope I've shown you some hidden gems, because I would hope that you're not familiar with a lot of these, and these are some of my favorites because they kind of nail it for what we're doing with Thanksgiving. But I'll think on that. Temperature for reds, I prefer 60 degrees. And it's funny, 8-9 months ago, someone would ask, well, how can you tell the temperature of the bottle? And nowadays, how many of us have those infrared thermometers? So just point it at the bottle and whammo. So in our wine competitions, we've been using those infrared thermometers, the kind you buy from Home Depot and Harbor Freight, not $60 on Amazon in a pandemic, but they work great. And they work great on the kids too for checking temperature. But you're able just to do a quick zap and say, okay, the wine's ready to pull out of the fridge. Some other quick questions. A Maryland winery that I would recommend. I will name two. One is Bordelot, south of Salisbury. Gorgeous wines, way too affordable. The other one is Antietam Creek Vineyards, and there are 104 wineries in the state, so those are just two. But Antietam Creek Vineyards in basically Sharpsburg, right on Antietam Battleground. One of the best Chardonnays I've ever had, anywhere, ever. Another one is Catoctin Breeze, north of Frederick. Really gorgeous wines there. But again, lots of different wines that I could recommend. What do I think of Argentinian and Portuguese wines, Mary? I love them. So for whites, there are some really great Portuguese whites, but they're all names that are not as common. And so just try them. They tend to be lighter, brighter, a little bit off dry, sometimes a little bit spritzy. And so I've found some really great ones with lots of names that I can't pronounce. Argentinian as well. I'm more familiar with Argentinian reds than whites, but you can find some really, really nice wines. Crios is the name. Susanna Balbo is someone who's making really nice wines down there. Big Cork, another one. Wind Ridge, another great one for Maryland wineries. Wind Ridge just released a sparkling wine, which is gorgeous. And I don't give wine tasting courses except for this one, but I'd be happy to. I've done it in the past and would be happy to. How strange is it that we might have to do it remotely or extremely socially distanced, but we can certainly do that. And what do I think of the effect on California wildfires? It has a serious effect. it has a really, really serious effect on the wine. So we're seeing research that's coming out saying that the vines are going to survive, the grapes are going to be smoke tainted. And so there's research to figure out how you get that aroma, that smell out of the wines. Because again, it's not just like I grew lavender next to my vineyard and I'm worried about lavender or hemp or something else getting in there. It's actual smoke that's getting in there and permeating through. And if you've had a fire in your house or in your car or whatever, that smell is really difficult to get out. So, um, and I think that's going to be for the next few years because, again, the wine's made this year. The whites will be available in the spring, the reds for a year or two. So they had bad fires 2 years ago. They had bad fires last year in certain regions and now this year. So there could at some point be a shortage that we're going to need to overcome. Any books for recommendations for tastings? Not so much books, but there are some tasting master classes that you can take online, which I find more compelling than reading the book. You can read the book. There are lots of books out there. There's one from UC Davis, which is the premier winemaking school in the US. And it's basically their course book. And they have got a few chapters in there, which are really killer. And you can find that book for $15. It's their kind of freshman course book. You can find it online, UC Davis winemaking and wine tasting course. But there are some famous wine writers who have gone online. James Suckling is one of them. He used to write for Wine Spectator. He now has a whole online portal. He just did a great review last year of American wines. So if you want to find the coolest great wine near you, that's a great resource. But he has a masterclass on tasting wine, and I would highly recommend that. So, any other questions? I didn't finish any of the bottles, just for the record, Colleen.
That's good. Good to know. Thank you, Kevin. This was great. I think we all learned a lot, and we're really excited that you were able to join us. And for everyone who's on here, we will be sending you all an email with the full wine list and also a recording of the event in case you missed anything that Kevin had to say. But really, on behalf of everyone at the Alumni Association, I want to thank you for the time tonight. And I think this will really help boost everyone's spirits at Thanksgiving. Thank you.